Welcome to the live Q&A for the Australian Property Investment Show. I just asked the speakers to please turn on your cameras and microphone and join me in this, or on the stage, as we'd like to call it, and we can get started with this Q&A. Okay, we've got everyone, which is fantastic. So we have a distinguished list of three guests, panelists, and we're going to be discussing and taking questions from the audience, as well as I've got a few prepared questions that we'll run through here. I'd like to cover and go for about 15 minutes. And just in terms of introducing everyone, on my right here, we've got Kate Bakos, who is a buyer's agent from Kate Bakos Property, and you're from Melbourne. Is that right, Kate?
I am. That's right.
Cool. And then we have just below me, Mike Mortlock, who is a quantity surveyor, and you're from Charleston. Nice. All right, so New South Wales guys, and also we've got Rich Harvey, who is from Property Buyer, another buyer's agent from Sydney.
Hey Liam, nice to be on your show, and look forward to all the questions today.
All right, fantastic. So everyone that's here, do just look on the right hand side. We've got the chat box. Do say hello, say where you're from, where you're tuning in from, maybe your favorite speaker, your favorite session so far. And then also we'll be taking questions just above that in the Q&A. So if you just accept to go through to the Q&A, and then you can enter in your questions there, and you can upvote questions, and we can go through them as they come in. All right, so just to kind of kick things off with you guys, we were just talking privately a little bit about this, about the market and what type of market it is for buyers. Rich, you were talking about this specifically. Do you want to just give us a bit of your opinion and what you see at the moment?
Sure. I think, Liam, at the moment, I'll give you a live example. I've just been out this morning attending an auction and a whole bunch of inspections, and I missed out for a client this morning, unfortunately. We had a property that was beautifully styled, and all the buyers felt an emotional connection, and we missed out by 50 grand. I was the underbidder. But there's a lot of people, a lot of hungry buyers chasing limited stock. Stock levels are down between 10, 20, even 30% in some suburbs, which is very unusual for spring. And so the laws of supply and demand are now applying. So as you've got more and more buyers more able to afford to get into the market, pushing up prices on a limited number of stock. So there's a lot of frustrated buyers out there, and some of them are making pretty silly offers and not being patient, waiting for the market to sort of be at a more normalized level. I can't really predict exactly when that will happen, but once we get once the stock levels return to a normal pace, I think the rate of price growth will start to decelerate again. So I think the message for buyers is to be patient, don't take shortcuts, and get good advice on the way through.
Cool. And Kate and Mike, don't feel free to jump in and make this a bit of a discussion, free flow. Yeah. So yeah, you guys got your opinions on that?
Yeah, I'm concurring with Rich completely. Melbourne and Sydney have very similar auction clearance rates right now, and our regions aren't immune from really strong performance as well. And I am saying to all of our buyers that are getting a little bit anxious about missing out, that it is the stock shortage that's driving this really aggressive trajectory of growth. And we are in a growing a market that's recovering. So we will see growth anyway, but growth at this level is quite difficult for buyers to keep up with. And I think the real message is what will bring the vendors back. And as we all know, data reporting and data lag is a significant issue. And vendors aren't seeing the rate of growth on the ground like buyers are, because buyers are at auction and watching properties go under the hammer. You don't tend to find that vendors are as active as that. So when the data does get reported and they see the significant growth, it will give them a lot more impetus to list their properties for sale. And I'm of the opinion that we'll see an increase in stock for sale next year. I don't think we'll see a ridiculous number of people putting their properties on the market, but I do think we'll see healthier numbers. So we have to remind ourselves of that. We won't be in a stock shortage environment forever.
Well, what about what would you suggest buyers do in this situation, in the current marketplace? Are we waiting? Are we doing something different?
I don't subscribe to waiting, because the market will continue to move positively, in my view, and so you'll just lose your place in the market. But still discerning between what will work for you, or if it's an investment, getting an A-grade investment. I think compromising on the quality of the property or the suitability of it as a home is a huge mistake for someone to make. But if the property is right, then understanding where value sits, doing some comparable sales analysis and getting your head around where it sits in terms of value, and also what sort of market forces could influence that price, is really, really important. So if you're facing an auction where you've got a couple of advocates, or buyer's agents, as we say in other states, and plenty of buyers, and if you ask the agent how many building inspections have been done or how many contracts have been requested, that should give you an impression of how hot that property is. And if it's looking like it could spin out of control, you've got to decide whether that's one race you don't want to run in, or whether you're prepared to give it a go to a sensible limit.
Okay, great. Mike, what are you seeing with your clients and your business?
Pretty so that's why investors and the
Okay, cool. So just taking a question here from Eddie, which actually came through a little bit earlier today. History has it the houses in capital cities grow on average 11% per year over the long term. Do you see this continuing forever?
Don't we? We'd all love 11%, Liam, but it's a big number.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the history of capital growth ever since records have been kept, you'll find the traditional numbers somewhere between 7% to 9% per annum. So Residex, which is now a CoreLogic company, have tracked capital growth, but there's vast differences between suburbs. 15,000 suburbs Australia-wide, they're not all going to grow at 9%. Some might grow at 12%. What I think has happened the last 5 years, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, we've seen price capital gain rises between about 70% to 90%. We came back the last 2 years, we've come back around a 15%, but we're rapidly re-picking up those lost 15%. I think it'll be probably mid to the end of next year, we'll be back at 2017 prices if the stock shortage stays the way it is. And then we're just going to have a slower burn, a more moderate price growth. But I'd be banking on a number, if for Eddie's question, I'd probably bank on a conservative figure of around 7%, 8%, something like that. But again, there's a lot of factors that go into what drives capital growth, Liam. There's a number of key drivers, and the top three for me is population growth, because people need a roof over their head. You need people with good jobs to pay mortgages or to pay rent if you're an investor. And the third thing is infrastructure. So population, employment opportunities, and infrastructure, those combinations are fantastic, more often in capital cities, to see strong capital growth.
I support Rich's statement completely, and I think having a more conservative number is really important. We have to ask ourselves, what is it that facilitates price growth? And it's the availability of money. It's incomes that are coming into that particular area. There's a saying that money grows where money goes. Now, as we have slower wage growth, that's one key thing that could slow down the rate of growth in given areas, because at the end of the day, our ability to fight for a property and pay whatever the price is contingent on our income. Now, something that I'm always asked about long-term growth is it sustainable? So Eddie's question is a very normal question. The concern that I've got around this assumption is that history doesn't necessarily determine future in this case, and I'll explain my point. Back in the 1950s, we had some enormous capital growth, and we had single incomes supporting mortgages in most cases. And then as we came into the 60s and then the 70s, we had the introduction of a secondary income in the family pool of money. But back then, as we all know, female and male salaries weren't the same, and females weren't all consistently working full time. And so we've seen an evolution of the second income in a family unit over past years. And we've now got to a stage, particularly in the inner ring, where we have two people from one household collectively earning strong incomes and full-time incomes. We can't add another income to that. You can't have more than two full-time incomes in a traditional family unit. So I think the assumption that we'll continue to see the same historical growth that we've seen in past decades is wrong, because we've now got a mature number of workers contributing to the family income. So I think that we will see a more conservative price growth longer term, because we've already seen incomes maxed out.
Yeah, Mike, I remember on Wednesday you were mentioning about wage growth. What's your thoughts on how that's affecting the market?
Yeah, my question was, where is it coming from? Because that's the real issue we've got in places, I guess, like Sydney, for example, where the prices are pretty high, and from a salary to asset price ratio, we're talking. Rich probably knows better than me, but I think it's around 12 times, which is pretty crazy, right? So I think, yeah, like with Eddie's question, charting property prices over a period of 50 or 100 years, it's a difficult thing. And as Kate mentioned, demographics have changed, and attitudes to debt have changed quite dramatically as well. So back in the day, it was the goal to get the little house with a picket fence and pay it off as quickly as you can, and then you were set. That was it, right? Whereas now it's all about leveraging and purchasing investment properties and pushing as hard as you can. I think the future of property is really going to depend on the nature of the workforce as well. So will we see a bit of a move away from the capital cities because our traditional notion of work changes as people work from home? I mean, you're yourself, Liam, a million miles away at the moment as an example. So, yeah, I think it's really hard to just sort of say, look, this has happened over the last 50 or 100 years and it's likely to happen again. But the 3 points that Rich made, they're obviously things to follow. And
one thing I'll just jump in, Liam, there, just to follow up from Kate's comment about the secondary income.
Trends
I think a lot of families now are perhaps even looking for a third source of income. They might even have businesses on the side. And I think, whatever form of income people want to have, buying in suburbs that aspire or that have aspirational buyers in, they're some of the suburbs you'll see some of the highest capital growth. So suburbs that have very high amenity. So I'm talking about places that, like in Sydney, that have got views of the harbour or close to the beach, or they're not too far out west. They've got really great quality housing stock. Those aspirational buyers, because there's very limited stock and limited opportunities for redevelopment in those kind of suburbs, and you need very high incomes. And I think there's going to be a lot of transitional or generational wealth passed on from families to be able to afford to buy in those suburbs. So when I'm out at auction these days, I'm often seeing the bank of mum and dad standing behind the young couple they're bidding, and mum and dad are whispering in the ear, yep, we'll give you another 200 grand. And that's what's happening in property prices. It's not being funded by the actual buyer, it's being funded by the intergenerational buyer that's behind the actual buyer.
That's our nemesis, isn't it, Rich?
That's so hard, isn't it?
Parents, yeah, are killing me.
That's why I think these income to asset price ratios just get so crazy. And there was a time where people were talking about the median price in Sydney was never going to get over $1 million because it's this psychological thing we can't get past, right? And I think the income I guess the household income to asset price ratio could potentially double in Sydney.
I think you got to look at the BRW Rich 100, Mike. But I think the income price ratio in Sydney is about 10. If you're buying in Mossman, it's 20. But I think Melbourne's around 8 times income. You're right. It will be the ability to pay for higher priced property will come from inheritances and I think intergenerational wealth, not just limited on a linear basis by one person's income.
Yeah, interesting thoughts. I've got a question for you, Rich. We're seeing a lot of relocating baby boomers, downsizers. They're selling the house on the quarter-acre block in what was once upon a time a middle ring normal suburb, and they're now expensive. They're making a nice gain, popping some of it into super, and then moving into all of the aspirational suburbs that the Gen Ys would have preferred to buy into. So for us, Fitzroy North, they're really tough to buy into right now because you're up against bidders that have grey hair and lots of money. Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of the downsizers that are moving, some of them actually moved from the leafy burbs where it's been sort of more sedate, and they want to move to areas or suburbs that have got more action, where they can walk to the cafes and leave the car at home and get Ubers everywhere, but they still want double parking. They're certainly smashing out some of the sort of more younger generational buyers. So they are a difficult buyer to compete against. But it's also opening up another opportunity. I feel like the market's actually a bit stuck in some of the suburbs too, because some of the older generation want to move into a townhouse or an apartment, but there's no stock available in the local area. So there's a big sort of clog. It's a bit of a quagmire at the moment where buyers can't move and don't want to move because they just can't move to the next thing they want.
Yeah, very true.
Just want to keep answering some of the questions coming in from the audience as we go. But this is a great conversation, guys. I love it. There was one that I thought was relevant to this discussion now, which was about valuers. Yeah, so the valuation of property. With lending restrictions easing generally, are you seeing valuers valuing over conservatively in general, especially for lenders who are considered friendlier?
Wow. It's a tricky one. I'd like to say that I don't see even-handed valuers. I'm sure that some would be aghast hearing that, but I think that risk of the loan and the applicant and their loan to value ratio, and I guess everything about their position on paper does influence evaluation. And that, I think that the reality is that if it's a low risk applicant and the LVR is low, it might not even trigger an actual valuation. It could just be a CMA type valuation where if it falls within a range, it goes straight through. But I'm definitely seeing some really antsy valuers and some very, very tough valuations, despite the fact that sentiment is so strong.
And again, that's that lag effect we talked about at the beginning too, Liam and Kate. It's like, it takes, the valuers have to use typically sales within the last 3 months as distinct evidence. They don't really like to go back any longer than that. And we've seen a dramatic shift in sentiment the last 3 months. It does take a while for the valuers, but a valuer should be completely objective, and they should spend enough time evaluating not just comparable sales, but the local market to determine a true valuation. We're the same. We sometimes cop some pretty tough valuations, but if a property is being sold at public auction, that's the value. It's very rare for a bank to knock back an actual auction result when you've got 7 or 8 bidders all competing for it. Dealing with values, it's always been a tricky business, and it always will be.
It is really tough, and we have to circle in on what conditions of valuers are working under. And I know a bank valuer might have to complete 15 valuations in one day. And that's a huge number. And if it's $200 of valuation, what is the quality of it? And whenever I've had, a rare situation where a valuation shortfall has occurred and we've had to fight it, you get the valuer's report and you're looking at their logic. And sometimes I've seen properties that are not at all comparable, and it's indicative that the valuer is not familiar with the area because they've compared an A-grade property in a great location with something on a main road with trucks going past it, or something on a tram route. And they're really fundamental things that anyone appraising a property should be well aware of. But I think when you're dealing with bank valuers that are under intense pressure and aren't familiar with the area and aren't being compensated for much more than a half-hour exercise, you will start to see issues with valuation reports.
And just on that, Kate, I think too, I don't know how long you spend doing appraisals, but we spend anywhere from 2 to 3 hours per appraisal for our clients. But we go into a lot more detail than what you'll actually see in a valuation report. So we compare the subject property to at least 5 comparable sales, and we do an analysis and we say, is the property comparable? Is it inferior or is it superior to the subject property, based on about 9 different measures, and they include aspect, they include floor plan, they include construction type, all of the features and fittings, the quality, the amenity. So we rate it on all of those factors, and it's quite tedious to do that. You get like you say, a bank valuer that has to spend 20 minutes doing that, and they can't adequately appraise the property. And that's where it falls over too.
You're absolutely right. And I spend a lot of time researching the anomalies as well, because like you, Rich, 5 to 8 is our magic number. For comparable properties. And if there's one that looks like it's an outlier, so it's an exceptionally high result, or it's a bargain result, we'll make the phone call and say to the agent, what were the circumstances? Because it could have been, I had one once where they said, oh yeah, we had a really emotional home buyer going for that one because of the proximity to her parents. And then we had someone else who was having a baby and absolutely prepared to fight tooth and nail for it. And I've seen, pregnant women at auction fighting hard for properties and taking it, many percentages over where I've appraised it. So there's always anomalies. And in the case of a bargain basement sale price, it might be that it was a terrible campaign, or they had horrendous pressure to get it sold quickly. So it was a drastic off-market situation that was facing a mortgagee claim, or there's lots of reasons why properties sell for a bargain or sell for a premium. And it could be the tenant, left it in an absolute state and no one could get any access, or it was a hoarder's house. So we try and
buying a neighbouring
those.
Property or family relatives or anything like that, you're going to see a premium price paid.
Absolutely. So I don't think that valuers ask those questions. Sometimes you see they'll single out a bargain sale and use that as a point as a comparable sale. And we have to say that was a bargain for all of these reasons, and everyone in town knows it.
All right, fantastic. Well, just going to the questions coming in from the audience again, and this might be more for Mike in regards to new properties versus existing, and how would you keep a positive cash flow with an existing property and without the high depreciation deduction?
So how would you get a positively geared property without good tax deductions? There's a million ways you could do. You could buy it with cash, like that would be good. That's really positively geared. I guess I need to know a little bit more about it to be able to answer that adequately. But if you, let's say you're buying a property and it's fairly neutrally geared, the rent is covering the expenses, and it's not a new property with great depreciation deductions. Obviously, you look for ways to increase that rental value. So you could do some cosmetic work or a small renovation, and of course, a renovation would mean you're then able to claim some tax deductions. Of course, refinancing your loan can help from a cash flow week-to-week point of view as well. So yeah, a little bit of a left field sort of question there. I need to sort of dig into it a little bit more, but you can certainly have cash flow positive properties that don't have depreciation deductions. Say they are in original condition, built in the 70s, but they're just purchased in a high yielding area where the vacancy rate is quite low and there's a lot of demand for rental accommodation, and there's maybe not as many buyers out there. There's certainly mining towns can be a great example of that, but I certainly wouldn't be advocating those unless you're one of those experts that can time that perfectly. And I would say that even a lot of buyers agents would say that they wouldn't call themselves in that category. But yeah, it's just all about if you want.
There's a couple of first-time buyers in here. I've noticed that quite a lot of the attendees at the show have been first-time investors, and so there's a couple of questions here. Maybe I'll tag together here just in regards to time. We'll probably go for around 5 minutes or so further, and then we can jump into the networking, and everyone in attendance can speak to these experts individually. But just combining these two here, I'm about to bid my first ever property auction. What are your best tips for this? And then the second question is, as a first-time buyer with a limited budget, should I still aim to use a buyer's agent, or should I save myself money doing the research?
Well, I'll go first. I'll go, Mike.
Well, let me jump in. I'm the only non-buyer's agent in the room at the moment. So in my impartial opinion, yeah, well, apart from yourself, I'm sorry, William, you should, I can understand if you've got a limited budget and you can only go so far, then there's a question of, okay, well, maybe I can stretch a bit further without hiring a buyer's agent. I think that the damage that you can do yourself without a buyer's agent is such that the price that they will charge pales into insignificance. The vast majority of property investors still only own one property. There's 90% of people own two or less, and that's probably not enough to really get you where you want to be. I guess a lot of people invest because they want to retire comfortably or they want to be financially free. One or two properties is not going to do that. So I would definitely say get a buyer's agent on your site. As for auction tips, you've got
Rich, you go.
pros in the room, so I'm not going to speak over them.
I've got a quick couple of auction tips. One, the person with the highest bidding limit wins. That's pretty obvious, but it doesn't always mean you have to bid to your limit. I would say the first thing you've got to do before you attend the auction is do some research on the local area and identify what the property is worth. Then from there, set your limit. Now, if you're going to be in that property for 10 or 20 years, and you say the market value is $1 million, you could be okay to spend just over the $1 million to get it. But I see so many people going to auction, they have a very vague idea of what their bidding limit is, and they end up spending more than they ever wanted. So that's what you don't want to do. In terms of preparation is key. Make sure you had the pest and building inspections done, you got your finance, so you're ready, and your 10% deposit ready to go. But on auction day, nerves will always play a big part for people that haven't been used to bidding. It's a pressure cooker environment. The auctioneer is trained to get every last dollar out of every last buyer, and he will look every buyer in the eye until he gets a no from that buyer before he'll put the hammer down. So they'll drag it out. So you've got to know the auction process and what auctioneers will do and how they perform. And some auctioneers will wrap it up reasonably quickly. So you've got to be careful to not lose the bid, but most will always give you a chance. So my advice is do your research, bid confidently. It's also about the pace of your bidding. Sometimes you might want to try and slow it down with $1,000 or $5,000 bids. Sometimes that can work. Sometimes it can work against you. So you have to read the play. You can't just write one book and say this is what applies in every auction scenario. But I won an auction recently on my absolute limit, but I had the appearance that I had limitless buckets of money. So it's a bit of bluff, and you have a lot of fun with it. I really good fun. What do you reckon, Kate?
I almost 100% agree with you. Being prepped and understanding your value is super important. Having the contract reviewed, don't ever think that glancing through a contract yourself cuts it. You need to have a legal rep look over it. The only thing I'd slightly disagree with you on, Rich, is sometimes the person with the highest amount of money doesn't win. And what buyers underestimate is the power of a plan. And it's a guesstimate here on my part, but I've been observing auctions and partaking in them for a little while as well. And when you get to auction, there's probably 10 or 20% of people who are bidding and they have a firm walkaway limit. They've thought it through, they've considered all of the possible scenarios, and they've got a contingency for having competition, and they have a firm limit. Then you've got the other bidders who are probably more like 60% of the bidders out there who have a bit of a vague limit. They have a vague idea of where they'd like to go to. So, for example, it's an $800,000 sort of property. They haven't thought through this the competition levels and where their stretch walkaway figure is. And so it gets to 800, there's still bidders in the crowd. Social proof kicks in. They say to themselves, well, everyone else is still bidding, maybe I should keep bidding. They start to look at their partner and confer, and they're having a price setting conversation in front of 100 people with a guy with a gavel in his hand yelling at them. It's a really uncomfortable position to be in when you're finessing your walkaway figure in front of a crowd. And then you've got your 20% of people who trotted along without having had a conversation about dollars, and they're wondering how it will go. They're the wait and sees. And so some of those wait and sees, or that circa 800, let's see how we go gang, won't be able to compete with you because you're confident, you've got a plan, you're bidding like you've got $1 million, just as Rich was saying, and they can drop off or feel exhausted or feel under pressure and lose their nerve. And, you know, once you've lost your mojo at auction and you're just relieved to see the spotlight off you, that's when you can regret afterwards not having a plan and letting a good one get away for a price that you would have been prepared to pay.
All right, and just in terms of wrapping this up, just in regards to time, so please, all attendees, if you've got further questions, do stick around afterwards to ask these questions individually of the experts. But I'd like to ask each of you and put this to each of you guys on the panel, two separate questions really here. I'm wondering what segments of the property market are most likely to suffer the most in a buyer's market, and then what kind of areas are suffering the most? And then secondly, what are the hotspots? What kind of places or locations around Australia are you recommending right now?
Who do you want to go first, Liam?
Yeah, you guys can put your hand up. I'll let you guys choose.
Oh, I'll put it out there and say which ones could struggle the most in a buyer's market. At the moment, anything with oversupply. As soon as you've got oversupply and you throw in a patch of buyer's market, you'll have a harder time selling it, particularly a compromised property. When we say compromised, anything on a main road or a train line, anything that a high number of buyers could opt out of because it's not ideal, they're the ones that struggle in a buyer's market. The signs of struggling are price reductions and longer days on market. The other one that I'll throw into the mix is apartments with cladding. We've got a real sensitivity to cladding issues. So anywhere where we've got a heightened number of them, an oversupply, and there's question marks about the cladding, they're tough ones at the moment.
And any hotspots you want to recommend? Okay.
In a ring, single level, anything that's cool and funky and near everything that doesn't have stairs and has a double garage, watch out. If you're an investor, you should be targeting something that cashed up baby boomers will love.
Cool. So the downsizers almost?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
To answer your question, Liam, the segments of the market that's going to struggle is the highly leveraged mortgage belt. So it's probably going to be like in Sydney, areas in the places that are like the McMansionvilles, like Kellyville or the Hills or the Southwest, where a lot of first home buyers, second home buyers who are highly leveraged that might struggle with employment opportunities. And if they lose their jobs, those kind of properties will come on the market and probably sell for a song. But that's a long way off. I don't expect to have mass unemployment, and I don't see a buyer's market cutting anytime soon, in fact. So I think, but we do need to be prepared long term. The market does move in cycles. Like Kate says, I actually just instructed one of my clients the other day not to buy on a main road. They said, "Oh, Rich, I could get into the suburb." I said, "Let's walk to shops." And I said, "Yes, great, but you're always going to have trucks rattling past your bedroom at midnight." I said, "Don't do it." I said, "I'm not letting you buy this property." So you've actually got to give instructions sometimes and be very firm with your clients as to say what they shouldn't buy to protect them from making a bad decision. So, and I think, as Kate said, there's little pockets of oversupply, but I think they're going to be temporary in Sydney. I mean, I wouldn't be buying places like in Mascot or Zetland or two-bedroom units in Parramatta where there's a significant supply, or Homebush. And obviously, we've had the Opal Towers and Mascot Towers fiasco. So there's a big aversion at the moment to buying anything, even apartments. There's quite a big aversion, or big high sort of red flag for a lot of buyers that they have to do a lot of extra research before they enter into those markets. As for hotspots, I actually did a talk about 2 weeks ago and I had 15 hotspots, but pockets of the inner west, I mentioned Earlwood, Hurlston Park as some areas, a little bit further out from your traditional sort of nicer areas, but they're good value. Northern Beaches around French's Forest near the hospital. Also the Sutherland Shire. I'm seeing some really good value in the Shire at the moment. So you're only 40 minutes from the airport, or 30 minutes, depending on which suburb. But we're seeing some families get in for that sort of early 1 million, sort of 1 to 1.3 range. So there's some good pockets down there as well.
I think apartments are going to struggle. We've obviously had a lot of media around the Opal Towers and the Mascot Towers and those sorts of things. This cladding issue is a very, very significant one, and I think it's something that the state government's going to have to jump in on. This external cladding is a nightmarish thing. I mean, obviously there's a cavity that air runs up, and the cladding can sort of turn into a liquid and spread through a building at an alarming rate. And I think apartments in general, we're going to see people move away from that for those reasons. And there's also been quite an oversupply. So a lot of the construction might take 2 or 3 years to actually finalise from planning to completion. I think a lot of that supply has been taken up in some key areas in Sydney. But as Rich said, Zetland's probably an example where there's a lot coming up there. And certainly there's lots of parts in inner city Brisbane where the supply is just crazy. And I think in general, off the plan apartments in those huge complexes aren't necessarily great investments, just because of the supply issue. When you're looking to sell or rent the property, you might have 200 or 300 in the development, so you could be competing with 30 units for sale the same time yours is, or 20 units for rent the same time yours is. From a hotspotting point of view, I'm sort of like an anti-hotspotter in a way, because I think that's the lollies, and we need to talk more about the veggies, and that's setting the plan of what you're actually trying to do with property, and then backfilling the properties to fit that. And it depends where you are on your portfolio, what you should be actually looking at, whether you're at the beginning and you're needing something that's cash flow neutral or positive, or whether you're looking more blue chip towards the end, or selling down and going in commercial. But I think anything that suits the shifting sands of demographics in Australia. We're seeing a lot of baby boomers and downsizers. So we've noticed within our data there's a lot of people purchasing townhouses compared to the last couple of years. So I think well-located, well-priced townhouses,
right,
and then
guys.
spunky
So
little,
I think there's
little
some
sort of short
fantastic
walks
points
to
there,
parks,
and
green
obviously some good
zones,
tips
and
for everyone.
cafes
Avoid
is going to
the
be a
oversupplied
good thing to look at.
marketplaces. Well, that's it for our live Q&A. Are you guys all happy to stick around and speak with the attendees? If anyone's got any individual questions, yep. I see some noddings there. Great. Okay, cool. Well, this has been fantastic. Obviously, I'd just like to ask everyone to join me in thanking our panelists for their time and their contribution today. So do let them know in the chat, as well as on the tables when we end this. But we do still have a full day tomorrow with the Australian Property Investment Show, another 9 sessions being released. So do stick around for that. With the networking now, we'll have a countdown timer for about 6 minutes, which will be on rotation. So just as an encouragement for you to meet new people, jump around to different tables every 6 minutes, and meet some other property investors and property experts. So Kate, Rich, Mike, thanks very much again for your time.
Total pleasure.
Pleasure. Cheers. Thanks.